sometimes in the evening when everything has already gone quiet, when the day's tasks are done, and there's nowhere left to rush to, a quiet thought suddenly appears in your mind. Why do others seem to do better than me? And along with that thought comes a strange feeling, not quite pain, not quite sadness, but something very familiar, as if you're just falling a little short, as if there's something wrong with you. And if you recognize this state right now, know this, you're not alone. This feeling is familiar to almost everyone. And today, calmly, without pressure, we'll figure out why our brain constantly compares us to others. Comparison is not a mistake. It's an important function of the brain. It doesn't do this to upset you, but to help you survive. Yes, that may sound unexpected, but simply put, your brain is not an organ of happiness. It's an organ of survival. Its job isn't to make you feel satisfied, but to keep you safe. And here we come to the first important word, comparison. Comparison is the process by which the brain measures you against other people to understand where you stand and whether you're okay. Imagine very ancient times when people lived in small groups. Back then, being worse than others could mean real danger. If you were slower, you couldn't escape. If you were weaker, you couldn't defend yourself. If you were worse at navigating, you could get lost. So the brain constantly scanned who is faster, who is stronger, who is smarter, who is more useful, and asked one simple question: am I okay compared to them? This mechanism stayed with us, but the world has changed. Now you don't need to run from predators, but your brain still keeps comparing. Only now it compares not survival, but life. And here comes the second concept, social comparison. Social means connected to other people. So this is comparing yourself to those around you. For example, who earns more, who looks better, who is more successful, who is happier. And the problem is that before you compared yourself to 20 to 30 people in your tribe, and now to thousands. Social media amplifies this many times over. You open your phone, and in just a few minutes you see other people's achievements, other people's travels, other people's appearances, other people's perfect lives. But your brain doesn't understand that this is a filtered picture. And again it asks, where do I stand in comparison? And here comes a very important point. The brain doesn't just compare. It does it with a bias. And here's the third concept, negative bias. A bias is when perception is slightly shifted. Negative means shifted toward the bad. Simply put, your brain more often notices where you fall short than where you're doing well. You may be successful in 5 things, but if there's one where you're behind, that's where your attention will lock. Not because you're weak, but because your brain works that way. It looks not for where everything is fine, but for where there might be a problem. And from this, a familiar feeling is born. I'm not good enough. But let's pause here for a moment and notice one thing. This feeling is not a fact. It's a reaction. And that's very important to understand, because a reaction can be noticed and let go. Comparison becomes painful not by itself, but because we start believing its conclusions. For example, you see someone who earns more. At first, there's just a simple comparison. He earns more than me. That's just a fact. But then the brain adds an interpretation. An interpretation is an explanation. The meaning you assign to the fact. And now it becomes, that means I'm worse. And that's where the pain appears. Not in the comparison itself, but in the conclusion. If you slow down just a little, you can notice how it happens. Almost automatically. Very fast. Almost invisible. And here we come to another important word. Automatic thoughts. Automatic means happening on their own. Without your conscious involvement. They're like flashes in your mind. Short. Fast. But very convincing. For example, I'm falling behind, I'm worse, I'm not keeping up, something is wrong with me. And if you don't notice them, they start to feel like truth. But the truth is, they're just thoughts, not facts. And this is where it gets interesting, because if you begin to notice these thoughts, they lose some of their power. It's like you take a step back and look at them from the outside. And instead of I'm worse, it becomes I'm having the thought that I'm worse. It's a small shift, but a very important one. Because in that moment, you stop fully merging with the thought. and space appears. Calm, a little more air inside. Now let's gently move on. Comparison intensifies when there's insecurity inside. And here's an important word: self-esteem. Self-esteem is how you evaluate yourself, how much you consider yourself valuable enough, okay? If your self-esteem is stable, comparison feels softer. You can notice, yes, he's better at something, and still feel calm inside. But if your self-esteem is fragile, any comparison becomes a threat, as if every time the question is, am I okay or not? And then someone else's success feels like your own loss, even though it's not a competition. But your brain still turns it into one, because it wants to define your place. And here comes another trap. We compare our inner world to someone else's outer picture. You know your doubts, your fears, your weaknesses. But about another person you see only the result. And the comparison becomes unfair. It's like comparing your draft to someone else's final version. Of course, in that comparison, you'll feel behind. And the brain concludes again, I'm worse. But if you could see the full reality of another person, all their doubts, all their mistakes, all their fears, the picture would be very different. And here you can breathe out a little, because it becomes clear. It's not that something is wrong with you. It's how perception works. And the fact that the brain sometimes slightly distorts the picture. And that's normal. You're not broken. You're just human. And if things feel a bit calmer inside right now, that's a good sign. It means you're starting to see what's happening more deeply. Now let's look at another reason why comparison becomes so painful. It's connected to the desire to be enough. And here comes the word perfectionism. Perfectionism is the desire to do everything perfectly, not just well, but without mistakes. At first glance, it seems like a useful quality, but inside it often hides a thought. If I'm not perfect, I'm not good enough. And then any comparison becomes a test. You look at others and almost ask, am I enough yet or not yet? And the answer is almost always, not yet, because perfection doesn't exist. There will always be someone a bit more successful, a bit more attractive, a bit faster, a bit more confident. And if you focus only on that, the feeling of I'm not enough never ends. It's like chasing the horizon. You move forward, but it stays where it is. And at some point, it just becomes tiring. Maybe you know this feeling. When everything seems fine, but there's no sense of peace inside, because there's always just a little more before enough. And here you can pause for a moment and quietly ask yourself, what if I don't need to be perfect to be okay? Let that question just stay with you without an answer. Now let's gently go a bit deeper. Comparison is often connected to past experience, especially to how we were evaluated before, in childhood. When we were small, we learned to understand ourselves through other people's reactions, parents, teachers, environment. If we were often compared to others, the brain remembered it. And here comes the concept, inner critic. The inner critic is a voice inside that evaluates you, sometimes strictly, sometimes harshly. It may sound like, you could do better, look, others are succeeding, why aren't you like them? And over time, this voice becomes familiar, so much so that it feels like your own. But in reality, it's just a learned pattern, a way of thinking you once adopted, and now it runs automatically, especially in moments of comparison. You see someone, and an internal dialogue starts immediately. And that dialogue isn't always supportive, but it's important to understand. This voice is not you. It's just part of your experience. And you can relate to it more gently. Not argue, not fight. Just notice. This is my inner critic speaking, and that already changes the feeling, because distance appears. And with it, calm. Now let's look at one more important thing. Sometimes we compare ourselves not because we want to, but because we're afraid. And here comes the concept, fear of falling behind. This is the fear that you're not keeping up with life, that others have already achieved, understood, found, realized themselves, and you feel like you're somewhere behind. This feeling can be very quiet, but constant. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's just in the background, like a subtle tension inside. And then comparison becomes a way to check. Am I still on time, or already too late? But there's a trap in this question, because life doesn't have a single schedule. There is no point where everyone must arrive. Everyone has their own rhythm. But the brain likes to compare along one line, as if there's a single scale. And on it, better, worse, ahead, behind, but reality is much wider. And if you widen your view a little, you begin to see people are just different, with different stories, different starting points, different paths. And then comparison loses its rigidity. Now let's take another gentle step. There's an important distinction that can greatly change how it feels inside. The difference between comparison and inspiration. Comparison says, I'm worse. Inspiration says, this is possible too. The difference is very subtle, but it feels different. In the first case, constriction. In the second, space. And if you notice this moment, you can sometimes shift between them. Not always, but sometimes. And that's already enough. Now let's slow down a bit, because we're approaching an important state. A state in which comparison begins to loosen its grip. This state is called acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It means stopping the fight with what already is, with yourself, your traits, your pace, your stages. It's a quiet inner yes, without pressure, without judgment. And it doesn't happen instantly. It's a process, slow, gradual, alive. Sometimes a step forward, sometimes a step back, and that's normal. This kind of calm, thoughtful exploration of the mind resonates with you. If you enjoy philosophy and psychology in a simple conversational form, feel free to support the channel. You can leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know that this kind of content matters to you. Take care, and see you in the next one.